Okay. So, hello again, everyone, and welcome to the 9th edition of the Neurocognitive Linguistics Circle, or CELIN, as we call it, using the acronym based on the Romanian name. I'm Paul Buzila, your host, and as usual, this meeting is being recorded so that people who are not able to join can watch it later. Well, this is a very special moment for us because last year on these dates, I think it was actually April the 2nd, we were having our first CELIN meeting. So I'm glad to say we are turning 1 year old now. Sorry. So there we go. I would like to thank all the invited speakers we've had during this year, and of course, many thanks to everybody who participated in the audience as well, because CELIN would not exist without you all. So thank you. You can find more details now about our activity and about future events on our webpage, which is hosted by the Center for Comparative and Cognitive Linguistics at the University of Bucharest. More importantly, you can find there also the recordings of our past events. You have a link there in this presentation, which I'm going to share with you after the meeting. And of course, you can also get in touch with us by sending us an email at clcc@lls.unibuc.ro. And I would also like to take this opportunity to thank again my colleague, Oana Balas, the director of the center, for welcoming us to their family. Now, just a couple of words. I had two main objectives when I started this CELIN series of events. The first one was more general, that is to create a community of people interested in discussing language from a neurological plausible perspective. And as some of you already know, during this first year, we had several invited speakers who presented different aspects of linguistic research, which all had in common this naturalistic approach, that is considering language natural object which can be understood using scientific tools and methods. Now, the second objective was a bit more specific, or is a bit more specific, and that is to kind of disseminate a linguistic theory which, in my view, respects this neurological plausibility criterion. And I'm referring, of course, to the relational network theory, or RNT, also known as neurocognitive linguistics. That's why I clarified from the very beginning that we would be using this syntagm neurocognitive linguistics with both meanings, a narrow one referring to the RNT model of language, and the wider one referring to any linguistic model or theory which has this naturalistic and neurological plausible approach. And I think that after 1 year, the first objective has been successfully reached. We have more than 150 people in our distribution list, and our online meetings had usually between 20 and 70 people in the audience each time, depending on personal availability, of course. And lately, we have switched from Romanian to English, and that, of course, has created the possibility for new members to join our CELIN community. And I hope that many more will join in the future. As for the second objective, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, we have had several interesting topics and speakers in the last few months. And although I wanted to dedicate a meeting to making a presentation on the RNT model, I always had to choose between doing that or welcoming one of the speakers who had already accepted our invitation. So in order to compensate for that constant postponing of the discussion about RNT, and in order to also honor at the same time the person who inspired me to start the CELIN meetings in the first place, I'm extremely happy and honored to tell you that we have with us tonight no other than the creator of the relational network theory, Professor Sidney Lamb. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation. Professor, can you hear us? Okay, I hope so. Professor Lam, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear.
Okay, all right, great. So just saying that thanks a lot again for accepting our invitation and for being with us tonight. Okay, let me just say two more things. There we go. Now, I know everybody has joined today to hear you, Professor Lem, talking, but I hope you will allow me a couple of more minutes, as
Yes.
I'd like to say a few words about Professor Lem and about his theory. There are probably many things that I should say about Professor Lam, but as I said, you're not here to hear me talk, so I'll try to keep this short. Sidney Lamb is Professor Emeritus of Linguistics and Cognitive Science at Rice University, Houston, Texas. He obtained his PhD in 1958 from the University of California, Berkeley, and he taught at the same institution from 1956 to 1964, directing the machine translation project from 1958 to 1964. He moved to Yale University in 1964 and taught there until 1977 when he left for a high-tech venture back in Berkeley. After selling it to a large electric company in 1980, he was appointed professor of linguistics and semiotics at Rice University in Houston, where he became Agnes Cullen Arnold Professor of Linguistics in 1983 and Professor of Cognitive Science in 1996. He was named Professor Emeritus at Rice in 1998, and I think he continued teaching for more than 10 years. I'm not sure, maybe you can tell us more precisely. Of course, it's true that he has been less active in the last few years. I'm not sure if he decided to retire from linguistics or he's just taking a break. As Jose was joking a few days ago, maybe to embrace a boxing career. Yeah, I'm glad that's getting better. Now, about his work, Professor Lamb's work has focused on several topics ranging from North American Indian languages to computational linguistics and machine translation, and most importantly, the underlying neurocognitive mechanisms of language. An early version of his theory or of his view on the linguistic system was presented under the title of Outline of Stratificational Grammar in '66. This version of his theory was developed purely on linguistic grounds, but it soon became obvious that the model presented strong similarities to neural structures as more and more information was coming from neuroscience research. So the theory was later considerably developed by exploring its relationships to neurological structures and to thinking processes. These later developments were incorporated in his 1999 book, Pathways of the Brain, the Neurocognitive Basis of Language. And then an updated and abridged version was published in 2016 with the title Linguistic Structure, Plausible Theory in Language and Discussion, Volume 4, Number 1, which is also available online. So I've just mentioned the 3 milestones, in my opinion, without mentioning all the other writings, of course. His model is based on the idea that the linguistic system, along with the general cognitive system, is purely relational, and that linguistic processing is a matter of selective activation along pathways in interconnected subnetworks of the overall cognitive network. And more importantly, I think these later publications have shown convincingly that the theory meets 3 criteria of plausibility: operational, developmental, and neurological. In other words, first of all, it convincingly shows that a relational network structure can account for a wide range of linguistic phenomena, even those that are problematic for other models, such as Freudian slips or other types of errors. In the second place, it plausibly shows how this linguistic structure is acquired or is being built by a process of selective strengthening of pre-existent latent connections. And in the third place, we can promisingly find neural correlates to most of the main ideas and details of the theory, such as the network architecture or the distributed representation of linguistic information, or the bottom-up nature of the learning process. Now, rather than delivering a typical presentation of his theory, which, by the way, is something that he actually did about 2 years ago when we invited him to our faculty's research seminar, I asked Professor Lamb to join us for a Q&A session. So that is why I asked people in our distribution list to send questions in advance, and I would like actually to thank everyone who has done that. Of course, due to time restrictions, we had to work on a short list, which means that we had to drop some of your very interesting questions. In order to have an objective process, I made a list of all questions and then leaving out the names of the persons who sent them. And then we cut it short to around 10 questions based only on their content. And only after that, we went back and checked the names so we can mention them today. And by the way, for those of you who made it to the short list and are here, I will ask you to read the questions yourself. So again, thanks a lot to all of those who sent us their questions, and I do apologize for not being able to address all of them. Our meeting is set to end after 2 hours, but if we still have some time left at the end, Professor Lamb agreed to even take questions from the audience. But if that is possible or not is something that we'll see towards the end. So that's it from my side. Professor Lamb, thanks again for being with us today. Are you ready? Would you like to say anything before we start firing questions at you?
Well, I have decided that it might be good to have questions from the audience after I respond to each of the questions.
Yeah. I just said that we will do that only if we still have time at the end after responding those.
Well, I think that maybe rather than waiting until the end, for instance, I can talk about question one, and then I can see if there are questions from the audience about that.
Okay, yeah, we can do that. Like check with the audience after each questions that has been pre-submitted. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. And then we can see if there's time at the end for more questions.
Okay.
If anyone is still interested in asking questions.
Great.
So I can start with question one from the list you sent.
Yeah, well, I have the list here, and as I said, I will allow people to read their own questions. Now, funnily enough, the first one belongs to me, and that will allow us to say my questions now, and then I'll try to be quiet for the rest of the meeting. So, yeah, so I'll just go ahead. I'm happy I made it to the final list. So, Professor, in your book, Pathways of the Brain, you talk about connections, which, if I understood right, are a sort of functional combination of nodes. Later on, you dropped this term and you only talked about nodes. Was this term, connection, a necessary concept at a certain stage of the development of the theory, which proved to be unnecessary later? Or how do you explain the fact that you stopped talking about them?
Okay, well, I can answer in two parts. The first simple part is just that it's good to avoid proliferation of terminology if we can. And so node serves well. But the second question is more substantive. If we look at the connections, here I have here are some typical connections. They each have this is in the broad nation, the original relational network theory. And in each case, you have here, let's see if I can point to this one. Yeah, if you're going downwards, this is input and that's output. If you're going upwards, then this is the input side and that's the output side. And similarly with all the others. Now, when we move on to the refined notation, it is bidirectional. I'm sorry, it is not bidirectional as the original relational networks were. Of course, it makes sense for the original relational networks to be bidirectional because language can be both produced and understood. And so everything has to work to allow that. But in the more refined notation, we separate production from reception, and they are two different processes, and they require different brain structures. Production is in the front of the brain, along with all muscular activity, and reception is in the back of the brain, along with all perceptual activity. So it's all one directional. Now, with the one directional networks, you don't really need the connection. A single node can have both input and output fibers coming from it. It is still possible to distinguish an input side from an output side. And in neurons, the output sides are axons. And some of the axons travel very long distances before branching out further. But still, in a simplified description, it makes sense to just use the term node. And so the node has both input and output. And so if it's not a very technical discussion, we just don't need the term connection. Okay, that's my answer. Now, are there any questions before we move on?
Okay, so it was my question. So if I understand right, it's actually a term that is useful when we are using the abstract notation, right? So at a certain level of abstraction.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. Thanks. All right. I think I hear some noises. So if everyone could just mute their phones and unmute them only when, microphones, unmute them when they have a question. So I will just go ahead and share again. And we have the second question, which is coming from Ana Radu from the Mind the Brain MA program at University of Bucharest. Ana, are you in the call? Would you like to read your question?
Hello, good evening.
Yeah, hi.
Can you hear me well?
Yes.
My question was how exactly are the latent connections initially formed, and what are the original states and origins? Because I have seen that, at least in the articles I have been studied, that it was rather emphasized the effect and manifestations of the connections, but I was rather interested in understanding their initial origins. And thank you so much for the opportunity to ask this question as well.
Okay, thank you. Well, the latent, I think it's to be the most realistic about this question, we ought to look at the physical implementation of these relational networks, and that, of course, is neurons. So we're talking about the actual neural connections in the brain. And the latent connections are formed as a result of the program from the DNA, actually. Most of them are formed along with the neurons. They are we're talking about axon fibers and dendritic fibers, and they are formed in the process of the development of the fetus in the womb. This is where most of the neurons are formed before birth. It's a very interesting process. All the neurons of a cortical column are formed after the cortical column reaches its location in the cortex, and then they come stacked right on top of one another, forming a column. And each of them develops a huge number of fibers, both dendritic and axonic. And so these axonic fibers go to, they are the latent connections in the initial state. And there are, by the way, huge numbers of them. In the axonal fibers go, most of the most important ones are from the pyramidal neurons, which originate in one part of the cortex from one column. They go to a usually distant part of the cortex, maybe 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 inches away, or several centimeters away. This is in the white matter. You know, the white matter is below the gray matter. And then they penetrate up into the gray matter where they are. I mean, it's only gray matter because that's the color of neurons. White matter is white because that's the color of the myelin. And each axon has a myelin sheath surrounding it. That myelin is very important, provides insulation as well as easing the transmission of the neural impulse and making it much faster than it would be without the myelin. When they reach the gray matter, they go vertically upward through the gray matter toward the outside surface, up to the top layer. You know, traditionally there are 6 layers in the cortex, and the top layer is where these axons branch wildly. I mean, really, wildly is the appropriate term here. They branch and connect to hundreds or even thousands of dendritic fibers, which are also wildly branching in the top layer of the cortex. Now, all these connections are in the initial state latent because they don't have any specific function yet. So that's the natural state of the neurons at birth. They have thousands of latent connections all over. There's a principle called neural Darwinism. The name comes from another neuroscientist whose name escapes me at the moment. Neural Darwinism, it's the idea that latent connections become dedicated to a particular function when they are successfully used, and then they go on to form the basis of further development. That's a kind of Darwinism, and it applies to neurons in this case, specifically to synaptic connections. Okay, I'll let that go as an answer to your question. And I'll ask if there are any further questions like along this line.
Thank you so much.
Okay, Paul.
So we can think about this latent connection actually as the let's say innate part of the whole system, right? Pre-existent from birth.
Yeah, they are there. The important thing is that the latent connections are there at the beginning, and then all learning consists of strengthening a selection of those latent connections. The ones that get strengthened are only a small minority of the ones that are available.
Now, some of the people who sent us questions sent several questions, and Anna was lucky enough or had good enough questions to have 2 selected on the final list. So Anna, again, I'll let you read your second question.
Yeah.
The microphone, Anna.
Excuse me.
Yeah, there we go.
Specifically here, I was interested. Well, I will read the question first of all. If not everybody would have the access to the screen, would the mere exposure to new information contribute to dissatisfaction of the threshold of the target node and therefore having the connection strengthened? Specifically here,
Yes.
I'm still delving into the phenomenon of the latent learning, and I was here specifically interested in understanding to what extent is the latent learning having an impact.
Sorry, to what extent?
I was interested to understand whether the phenomena of the latent learning would be having an impact on meeting the threshold on the long run.
Yeah, I don't quite. Let's go. In your question, as you submitted it, would the mere exposure to new information contribute to the satisfaction of the threshold of the target node? Basically, the answer is yes, but I would object to slightly to the terminology used in the question. New information. It's remember, we're at the level of the brain. We're not really talking about new information. Information is our interpretation of the results of all that happening. What's happening in the brain is just that a connection is being strengthened. The strengthening has the form of it affects both axons and dendrites, the terminals of axons and dendrites. And we have to turn to neuroscience.
Does this image from your book help you explain it a bit?
Yeah, there's a good diagram, yeah. And the ones with filled in arrowheads are the ones that get, like with the number K there, they get strengthened as a result of their successful use. They, by the way, going back to the next question, here you see a sort of a version of the nexion in this one-way diagram, where that little branch going off to the upper right from the top of the circle would be the axon branch, which, and the dot at the end of it indicates that you could have further branching from there, as we always do. Okay, now the strengthening in terms of the neural structures probably exists at both the axonic and dendritic levels. So in terms of axons, strengthening can mean building of additional axon terminals connecting to that neuron. And by the way, some of the axon terminals are on the cell body of the receiving neuron rather than on dendrites. So you can have additional axon terminals being built, as well as the strengthening of a single synapse would consist of possibly increasing the size of the axonic terminal, or increasing the size and also increasing the size of the dendritic terminal. And that would allow more neurotransmitter to go across the synaptic gap at a time. These are just suggestions. We don't know the answers, but maybe some neuroscientists do. We have to get some neuroscientists involved in paying attention to our work, basically, so they can investigate those questions. So they are initially formed genetically. And that's the short answer to your question.
Thank you so much.
All right. If there are questions about the question or comments, if not, we will move on. Hold on, I'm trying to navigate between several pages. I think this is the one. Okay, yes. So moving on, we have the fourth question coming from JP Sank from Sank's Glossary of Linguistics, USA, I think. I'm not sure. JP, are you in the call?
Oh, hi, Paul.
But I'm not sure.
You here?
Let's see.
Well, okay. Maybe
I'm
Paul
looking
isn't here.
over the list of the people in the call. I think he's not. So I'll just go ahead and read it.
Okay.
Okay, so he says, in my attendance at many linguistic talks and conferences over the past few years, it seems that I hear the word construction more often these days. Your theory came out with the same notion quite a while ago. What do you call it, and can you draw at least one example for us of how relational network grammar would visually represent one? Is it possible that a relational network grammarian could put together a constructicon, that is a whole big catalog of diagrams representing the various constructions of a language?
Okay, this is it turns out to be a surprisingly rich question because it has several branches to the answer. Okay, the term construction is a traditional term in linguistics. It goes way back to before my time. It is turns out to be a very applicable term when you're doing relational network linguistics. Let me start with the diagram here. I'm going to here's a typical nection. Can you see this?
Yeah.
Down the bottom on this, wait a minute, this one here, we go to 3. Let's think of this as a diagram of a word or a morpheme, lexeme. It's got 3, going down to 3 parts. Now, there is most of the such nections, these 3 lines, or however many there are. In a typical case, it would be only 2. Like this. Most of them go to a single object, maybe a phoneme. But in some cases, if we allow them to go in relational network term, go to multiple things, then this is what would correspond to what's usually called a syntactic construction. It's really very similar, as you can see.
Can you just move it a bit to the right?
You have multiple possibilities instead of a single possibility. And
Professor, can you show that again and move it a bit to the right, because we were not able to see it? Yeah, I think that's better. Okay, so with an OR node.
So you go downwards to multiple possibilities instead of a single possibility. So this could be a language in which the adjective is preceded by the noun and modifies, and this could be the noun-adjective construction. The noun-adjective nouns, this goes to multiple possibilities. An adjective. But you see both the fixed, then this means you have a fixed sign as the usual vocabulary item, and you have variable signs in which one of the constituents is variable. That would be, so the term sign is what covers both of those possibilities. One is a fixed and the other is the construction. What is ordinarily considered a syntactic construction. You can even then have the possibility of both constituents having multiple possibilities. This is such as a subject-object construction or topic-comment construction. So that means that the entire structure of a language is a collection of signs, a stratified collection of signs, some of them variable, some of them fixed. The variable ones are called constructions. There's a PhD dissertation that was directed by me several years ago at Rice University. The author is Cynthia Edmiston. The title is English Grammar as a Stratified System of Signs. And she developed this whole idea with respect to English. She never published it, unfortunately, but I think nowadays dissertations are available online, so you may be able to find it somewhere. If you look online, it's Cynthia Edmiston, English Grammar as a Stratified Collection of Signs. So she applied this principle to the whole of English grammar, and the principle would be applicable to any linguistic structure. In other words, a relational network as a whole is a bunch of interconnected connections, each one of which is actually either a vocabulary item or a construction. And so the answer to the second part of this question, is it possible that a relational network could put together a constructicon, a whole catalog of diagrams representing the various constructions of diagrams? The answer is yes. In fact, the entire linguistic system amounts to a constructicon. That's really it's just the same thing as saying that that everything that we have, all of our knowledge, including our linguistic knowledge, is in the form of a relational network, and the relational network consists of connections. So there you have it. That's my short answer to that question. A good question by Sank. That glossary of linguistics is available online, by the way.
Yeah.
Okay. Any
All
questions?
right. Thanks. If anyone wants to comment on that. Well, if not, moving on, we have Flavia Josef from our Faculty of Foreign Languages and Literatures from the University of Bucharest. Flavia, would you like to read your question?
Yes, of course. Thank you. Good evening. My question was actually about terms and terminology, and I was wondering about the difference between neurolinguistics and neurocognitive linguistics, because people seem to mix quite often these two terms. And I was wondering if you could just briefly tell us the difference. And thank you very much, Professor.
Okay. Well, these two terms are, they overlap a lot with respect to their meaning. Neurolinguistics is a term that was coined in the 1970s, and that was done by a man named Harry Whitaker. He actually, I can give you a little background on that. In 1971, in a special linguistics summer session at the State University of New York, Buffalo, I taught a course on language and the brain. This was back in the days before linguistics was interested in the brain at all, and I was curious about the whole topic and taught a course, Language and the Brain. Harry Whitaker was a student at the time, and he took the course, and later he made that his career, and he coined the term neurolinguistics. There should be such a thing, he said, as neurolinguistics. That would be the study of language and the brain. And that term, we already had psycholinguistics and sociolinguistics. So neurolinguistics was a easy term for the world to accept. And so we have that discipline. So neurolinguistics is the name of an interdisciplinary field, combination of linguistics and neurons. And it's a neuroscience, trying to explain how the brain supports language. Neurocognitive linguistics, on the other hand, it started out as the name for a particular linguistic theory. I had started also in the early 1970s, I started using the term cognitive linguistics for my approach to linguistics because it was operationally plausible, and it seemed to be neurologically plausible too, although we hadn't demonstrated that yet. So I called it cognitive linguistics. Later on, I discovered that Ronald Lanaker of the University of California, San Diego, had started applying that term to his work. And so I needed a different term for my work. Well, unlike Ronald Lanaker's version, nobody ever tried to relate at that time, as so far nobody had tried to relate Lanaker's version of cognitive linguistics to brain structures, whereas I had done so with mine. Anyway, so I decided, well, okay, let's call mine neurocognitive linguistics to distinguish it from the more general term cognitive linguistics. So it's the term for a particular linguistic theory. It could be a term for the general, for more general explorations, but that's the way it is. Yeah, does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you, Professor.
It does more than that, I think, because actually you also explained how it relates to cognitive linguistics and
yes,
the whole history of the concept, which is very, very interesting. Thank you. Okay, so moving on, we have a question from Juana Balash, who's the director of the Center for Comparative and Cognitive Linguistics. If I'm not wrong, I think she's not in the call because she told me she had some classes to teach. So I will go ahead and read it myself. So there have been several attempts to bridge the gap between linguistics and other natural sciences, mainly neuroscience. One of the main issues that arise is that the so-called mapping problem. That means trying to find neural correlates of the main aspects of linguistic theories, like linguistic units, mechanisms, etc. This has led to a quite low level of epistemic transfer from linguistics to neuroscience, according to Baggio. Is RNT in a better position as far as this epistemic transfer is concerned? And what kind of knowledge, what kind of findings, hypotheses, etc., could be transferred from RNT to neuroscience?
Okay, that's a very interesting question, very important question. Let me begin by saying that I am not familiar with that paper by Baggio, paper or book, Baggio 2020. But I certainly agree that there has been a very low level of transfer from linguistics to neuroscience. As far as I'm aware, neuroscientists have not paid any attention to cognitive linguistics. I think maybe, well, they have their lives so full of the work within their own field, they're not even aware that anyone from linguistics has come up with this theory. I mean, my book was published in 1998, which had a lot to contribute to neuroscience, but neuroscientists have remained unaware of it for the last 25 years. It's been 25 years, and there's by now it has reached the point, 25 years ago, that's ancient history. We don't have to pay attention to that anymore. And so my linguistic work, supposedly applicable to brain structures, has been completely ignored, as far as I know, by people working in neuroscience. But RNT is in a better position. What kind of knowledge could be transferred from RNT to neuroscience? There's a section of my paper, my 2016 paper, devoted to that topic. In the last section, I have a copy here. Let me see. Yeah, under section 11 is on neurological plausibility. And
I have a PDF version, so if you tell me the section, maybe I can share it.
oh, yes.
Or the page.
Page 21. It begins.
21. Oh, let me go ahead and share it first. Then let's see. What is it?
So anyway, we start with the properties of relational network connections. Whether you look at it, well, if you look at, you really need to look at them at the narrow notation level. Well, figure 17 shown here. That's something that is needed in the operation of relational networks, and the same relationships hold for neural networks. That is, a neuron responds quantitatively in terms of the rapidity of release of neural impulses, from one axon to another. It responds directly to the amount of incoming activation. More incoming activation produces more outgoing activation, and that graph illustrates that point. And so, and also several other properties of relational networks correspond directly, we find, to the properties of neurons. For instance, take neurotransmitters, for instance. The neurotransmitters is an interesting topic. The term neurotransmitters in its own, this is a digression, but you ask a neuroscientist, how many neurotransmitters are there? Well, there are maybe 20 or more, but the term is misleading. It's the Whorf principle applies here. Whorf, the principle is basically that language influences thinking. The terms used can influence thinking. So neuroscientists can become, I hesitate to use the term confused, because that's the only term that occurs right now. By that terminology, in fact, there are only two neurotransmitters that operate in the direct transfer from one neuron to another within the cortex. One of them is inhibitory, the other is excitatory. And so the seeming complexity of the neurotransmitter picture is actually just a terminological obfuscation, an obfuscation caused by the terminology that one is using. There are really only, as far as the operation of a relational network, there are two major neurotransmitters. One is excitatory, and some neurons send out excitatory signals, and there's the inhibitory, and some neurons send inhibitory. Each neuron can send only one or the other. However, a cortical column of neurons, and that's it's a group of about 100 neurons, that's what acts as the node in a relational network. And because every cortical column has both excitatory and inhibitory neurons, a cortical column sends both types of activation to other neurons, to other nodes. Now, okay, that brings us back to the main topic here. the node of a relational network, the narrow notation, corresponds to or is represented physically by a cortical column. Cortical columns are as defined and elaborated by Vernon Mountcastle in this book of his, this magnificent book, which, like mine, was also published in 1998 or 1999. But it's, I wouldn't call my book magnificent, but this is a magnificent book. And it too has yet to be fully recognized in neuroscience. It was published by Harvard University Press. It's been around for 25 years also. Its findings have yet to be accepted by all of the neuroscientists around the world. Anyway, let me go back to the main question now.
Yes, I think that the second part was related to the kind of information that can be transferred from linguistics to neuroscience.
The interesting thing is that these properties of relational networks, we need two kinds of activation going from one node to another, excitatory and inhibitory. That turns out to correspond to the reality in neural networks. Furthermore, it turns out that the excitatory ones go only to other nodes, whereas the inhibitory ones can attach to fibers, to other axons. That is predicted also by relational networks. We have that as a property in relational networks. And I thought, when I first looked at the possibility of connecting to brain structure, I thought, oh, this is a problem. We would have to be able to find that in neural structures, there are axonal connections to other axons. And then I found, there are such connections. Hey, that's pretty good. And the more you look into it, you find that the cortical columns, as described by Vernon Mountcastle in that book, work quite well as the physical implementation of the nodes of relational network theory. And so the findings of Vernon Mountcastle and these elaborate experiments that he describes in that book all turn out to furnish evidence in favor of the relational network theory. What you have difficulty doing if you're working only in neuroscience is figuring out how all these structures work. How do they make it possible to process information? In order to answer that kind of question, you have to look at the functions of neural networks. And one of the functions is language. People are able to speak, they're able to understand, they're able to think, and do all those things that language allows us to do. Now, if you look at those higher level questions, you have something, you're looking at functions of linguistic networks. And you have to look at the problem of the brain operation from that higher level point of view, from the terms of functional, such as linguistic operations, in order to get some kind of a handle on how the brain operates. And that's what linguistics can provide. That's what neurocognitive linguistics does. And so it turns out that we find answers from neurocognitive linguistics to basic questions of neuroscience. Unfortunately, the neuroscientists have yet to be aware of that. Now, so a lot of findings from neurocognitive linguistics could be transferred to neuroscience. it just remains for somebody who is able to talk to neuroscientists to point that fact out to them. Okay, that's my answer to that question.
Great. Thanks a lot. I think we have Adolfo in the call. Maybe he can tell us a few words about, because if I understand right, he's coming a bit from neuroscience. Adolfo, what's the position in neuroscience about this? I mean, are people paying attention to this kind of theories?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes. And sorry for dropping you in the water like that, but I think you are the most knowledgeable person about what's going on in neuroscience right now.
Happy to be thrown into any pool that Sid is swimming in. So
Yeah.
great to see you again, Sid. It's been a long time, my friend. I think Sid is right in saying that neuroscience has not taken heed of what's going on in linguistics at large and relational network theory in particular. The neuroscience, if you think about it in systemic terms, is not a monolithic field either. There are many different ways of doing neuroscience with different levels of granularity or resolution in terms of the structures and functions that neuroscientists care about. So some people work on macroanatomical terms, some people work at the systems level, some people work at the single cell level, some people go even further and they focus on metabolic, ionic processes. Some people don't even focus on neurons per se, they focus on glia and things like that. And I have to say that most of the neuroscience of language, or let's say neuroscientific studies, experimental and theoretical works on neuroscientific, neurobiological aspects of language, they are often predicated at a level of granularity that is coarser than that relational network theory sets forth. I think to a certain degree, this is so because of the traditions that a physiology and more inceptive neurolinguistics sort of builds upon. It also has to do with limitations that are technological in nature. There are very, very, very few techniques that would give you the level of resolution that you would need to empirically test hypotheses and predictions that stem from relational network theory. And those that are available, they are very, very rare. I can think, for example, about electrocorticography or lead-based intracranial recordings. The thing is that there are very, very rare chances of using these technologies. Basically, you use them in people with refractory epilepsy, and the opportunities are rare, and the chances to do experiments with those people, I mean, we have that chance, we do it in several countries, but usually in the context of grants that are aiming to answer questions that are again predicated at a level of granularity that is not the one that relational network theory would require. So I think that due to this combination of sort of an epistemological tradition and technological limitations, in addition to funding agencies' priorities, I think there you have the perfect storm for why the connection with these linguistic theories is not more profound, and I should say, unfortunately, quite absent in the field at large. Again, Sid, so good to see you again. It's
Yes, yeah, good to see you, Adolfo. Yeah, that's very interesting. Yes, it's true that neuroscience is a very broad field with many different kinds of investigation going on, and most neuroscience is looking at the these low-level what I would call low-level mechanisms. That's not a derogatory term. What goes on at the cellular level and the syntactic level and so on. But I guess the field that linguistics could most specifically apply to within neuroscience would be cognitive neuroscience, where they are interested in how cognitive structures are implemented neurologically. And so here's where relational network theory has some kind of contribution to make. Now, it is true that it's very hard to do experimental verification of the hypotheses put forth by a relational network theory. This brings up the paper that I wrote in 2000, I think it was 2008, Language and Brain. When experiments are not feasible, you have to think harder. The neuroscientists work by the experimental mode, of course, and I wouldn't want to say anything against that, but there are also other modes. Look at it this way. The reason people do experiments is basically to get more information. Now, there are other ways of getting more information. You do experiments to verify or disqualify hypotheses. There are other ways to do that. For example, the hypotheses of neurocognitive linguistics, you can get more information by looking at neuroanatomy. For example, by looking at a lot of the details in Mountcastle's book. And you find that all those neuroanatomical details provide support. There is also, I go into this in section 4 of, sorry, not section 4. I'm looking at my paper from 2016.
Meanwhile, just to give some background,
yeah,
Adolfo, who just
section 11 of that paper
earlier, is the director of Cognitive Neuroscience Center at the University of San Andres in Argentina. So
oh,
we had the words of an expert.
Yeah. Oh, maybe it's over here. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Yeah, we have. I developed the idea of internodal proximity, section 13 of that paper, internodal proximity, and we developed the two properties of functional specificity. Here. Is this okay? Functional specificity and functional adjacency. Yeah, I don't know. Can you see that? Functional specificity, functional adjacency. These principles are developed by thinking, not by experiment, and deriving the conclusions from relational network theory. We get functional specificity, that is the property of every node of a relational network and every column of a neural network. It has a specific local function. That's a fact that is derived from relational network considerations, but has not yet been accepted, as far as I know, by neuroscience, by cognitive neuroscience. A specific function, for example, a node for cup has a specific conventional value. There is a single node for cup that has the value cup. Well, we find neuroanatomical support for this, and you see it in the work of Mountcastle. In the experiments that they have done, they find that, for example, a specific point on the tip of a finger has a specific function. Sorry, I skipped a point. A specific point in the cortex. Well, let me put it. Each specific point in the region of the cortex corresponding to fingers represents a specific point of the finger. Functional adjacency means that same principle of specificity applies for adjacent columns. So the prediction from relational networks would be that adjacent columns in the brain have closely related functions. This is also supported by the evidence in Mountcastle, and it's also supported by evidence from aphasia. That is, when a person with brain damage loses the ability to process names of vegetables, it applies to vegetables as a class. You don't get unless it's a very general brain structure damage, you don't get a person who loses the ability to process, say, apple and grasshopper. Rather, if a person loses the ability to process apple, he probably also has lost the ability to process other kinds of fruit. And if a person lacks the ability to process the term grasshopper, that same brain lesion also affects his ability to process information about other insects. This is the principle of functional adjacency predicted by relational network theory. So for that branch of neurolinguistics, we have a lot to offer. Okay.
Yes, thank you very much. I noticed I had some issues with my connectivity with my network, so I hope I won't disconnect. So I think we can move on with the questions we have on our list. Let me just share again. And the next one comes from Tiberiu Bolbach, who's also an MA student in the same Mind the Brain program at the University of Bucharest. Tiberiu, are you in the call? Would you like to read your question?
Yes, hello, good evening. So the question is, how can the brain's ability of neuroplasticity be reflected in the modeling of relational networks? I posed this question, I believe, because I couldn't find a specific reference to the brain's ability to be neuroplastic. So perhaps I wanted a sort of clarification in this direction.
Yeah. Well, yeah, neuroplasticity is very important. It's a kind of adaptability of the brain to changing conditions, I believe that the learning theory of neurocognitive linguistics is where latent connections become dedicated as a result of successful use. I believe that will account. It correlates to neurological accounts of neuroplasticity. That's about all I have to say about that.
Thank you.
You know, the brain is automatically flexible and adaptable to new circumstances, changing circumstances, because of the way learning operates in relational networks. And that's the same thing. It's a different way of describing neuroplasticity as I see it.
Thank you. It's way clearer now.
All right, so this MA program seems to be producing very good students because, again, Tiberiu, just like Anna before, made it to the finalist with 2 questions. So Tiberiu, go ahead again.
Cool, thanks. Okay, so Is it hypothetically possible to create a complete relational network that accounts for all possible relationships between linguistic elements, just as it's theoretically possible to create a complete connectome of the human brain? I was thinking in this situation about the fruit fly specifically. I read some mentions that the fruit fly's brain has been completely mapped in terms of, well, brain structure. So there's kind of a complete brain map of it. And the fruit fly, I believe, has 300 something, I might be wrong, 300,000 something neurons. So in theory, I suppose that the human brain could, with its trillions of synapses and tens of billions of neurons, could at some point be fully mapped. So I think I was wondering if considering that there should be a strong relation between the relational networks and the actual neural networks, if by mapping neural networks we could also map multiple relation, or we could have a full map of relational networks that could perhaps describe um, linguistic rules, for instance, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, okay. I guess the short answer is yes, but the longer answer is pretty complicated. First, let's think a little bit about the idea of the connectome of the human brain. When you take the whole brain, in the first place, let's consider the concept of the human information system. The brain would be the physical repository for the human information system, whatever humans have. Okay, now the interesting thing is, to digress a little bit, is that a language, when looked at from the broader point of view, is the same as the human information system. And we get to this conclusion by considering, for example, the problem of making a dictionary. Now, the dictionary has to give the meaning of every word, to put it very simply. The meaning of every word, that's a very rich idea. To give a complete account of the meaning of a word, just a simple word like cat or dog, to give a complete account is no dictionary ever does that. It would have to be like an encyclopedia entry for cat or dog. So a complete dictionary, if there ever were such a thing, would have to be encyclopedic. You would have to be an encyclopedia. And even the encyclopedia doesn't say everything about everything. It says a lot, but it doesn't say everything. And so, since the dictionary is part of a description of a language, the language includes knowledge about everything that the human being has experienced, except perhaps those things which is impossible to talk about at all. If there are such experiences that are so ineffable, and there are such, by the way, so ineffable you can't talk about them at all. But leaving aside such things, everything that we do talk about, the whole encyclopedia of knowledge, the whole of everything that is treated in universities, is part of the language system. Okay, so a relational network considered broadly is actually a way of representing the whole of the human information system. Now, the idea of the connectome is also a way of representing the whole of the information system. So what's going on here? Well, since everybody's, or let me put it this way, instead of calling it the information system as a whole, let's call it the theory of everything. Everybody has a theory of everything that has been experienced. It's all of our theories are incomplete, but it's a theory of everything that we in our minds have experienced and thought about and so on. That's a relational network. Well, okay, so a connectome is supposed to be the same thing. So what's the relationship? In the first place, everybody's information system is different from everyone else's. There are greater differences between speakers of different languages, as Sapir and Worf pointed out years ago, but even speakers of the same language have different bodies of knowledge. And so the idea of a connectome becomes a little shaky because, how could you have a connectome of the human brain? You have to have a connectome of each individual's brain. There being a lot of differences, many differences, multitudinal differences between the connectomes of every individual. The reason for this can be seen if you look at learning. Learning, as connections get built, there are latent connections all over that allow for anything at all to be learned. And only some of these, a very small minority, become dedicated to a particular function. And when they become dedicated, and you have built a complete information system, which doesn't happen until you're about 25 years old. And then it keeps on growing a little bit after that, as well as diminishing when you forget things. It's all based on the individual experiences of the particular individual that we're thinking about. So you have to wonder whether this idea of building a connectome is feasible at all. But hypothetically, in a very broad sense of the word hypothetical, it is possible to create a complete relational network. You would never do it. It's too complicated. Nobody can ever do that. So I think that people who talk about connectomes maybe haven't fully realized how much difference there is between the connectome, as a hypothetical concept, we can think about it. The connectome of one individual to that of another is vastly different. So it would not really make a lot of sense to have a thing as such a concept as the connectome of the human brain. Just as it doesn't make sense to talk about a relational network of a human brain. You could take a typical human brain and theoretically, hypothetically, you can say that, well, every human brain has such a system. It's beyond our ability to construct the whole thing, of course, to construct a model of the whole thing. Well, okay, that's what I have to say about that.
Yes,
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And we will move on to our next question, which comes from Mirela Mitrescu from the same MA program. Mirela, I think she's not in the call, so I can read it, or maybe one of her colleagues want to read it. Anna, would you like to? Or I can just go ahead and read it. So Mirela asks us, how would this theory explain cases of neural malfunctioning, such as different types of aphasia or dyslexia due to congenital causes or brain injury?
Well, okay, different types of aphasia are caused by damage to the neural network resulting from, say, from a stroke. So in the both best known cases are Broca's aphasia. Now, damage has occurred in the frontal lobe in what is known as Broca's area, and usually in a lot of surrounding tissue as well. All of this is correlated with what has been developed in neurocognitive linguistics. For example, we have a network, a relational network for each of us for our information system, and it has different portions. And if we relate it to the brain, those different portions are found in different parts of the brain. So there's a portion of the relational network that corresponds to Broca's area in the brain, and so on. And so the way I would look at the results of all that thinking is that these different types of aphasia provide evidence for the findings of neurocognitive linguistics. This is experiments. Since you can't do direct experiments that provide support for the theory, you have to, as I was saying earlier, you have to look at other kinds of evidence, and different kinds of aphasia provide evidence. Now, for example, I talked about this earlier when I was talking about functional specificity and functional adjacency. As far as dyslexia due to congenital causes, I don't know about that. But any congenital cause of a brain defect would also provide support because it would be consistent with how it would be explained in neurocognitive linguistics. Okay, that's what I have to say about that.
All right, thank you. If there are no comments, we can move on. And we are, I think we have 2 more questions on our list. So number 10 comes from Eli Matos. I hope I'm pronouncing it right, from FrameNet Brazil Lab, from the Federal University of Juiz de Fora in Brazil. So Eli just mentioned it in the chat. Are you still here? Do you want to read your question?
Thank you. Thanks, Professor. My question is about how the relational network theory is related to the LLMs, the large language models. We can see a very intensive use of LLMs in the recent years, and I would like to know your opinion about the relation between neurocognitive linguistics and this kind of deep learning use in the language area.
Yes. Well, okay. I have to say first that I have only a limited knowledge of artificial intelligence and large language models, but from what I do understand, it seems to me that these large language models, they're called artificial intelligence. I don't think, okay, we have to emphasize the word artificial, because they don't represent intelligence the way human beings have intelligence by virtue of the way their brain operates. The large language models they collect huge samples of linguistic texts, and then they do whatever kind of statistical studies of those in order to come up with the ability to generate new stuff, or supposedly new stuff. It's actually not new, not really, because it is based upon those outputs that have been collected. The relational network theory is a theory of the actual operation of the brain, and the brain is also exposed to huge amounts of data, but not as much as those large language models have. And it has ways of generalizing just by the way it automatically operates, just by the way the learning principle operates. It absorbs and incorporates all the information, all the linguistic information that it has received, and builds its relational network based on that. And then from that, it generates new texts. So the process is similar but different from that of the people doing artificial intelligence. It's like the difference between take the example of a person learning, a child learning to catch a baseball thrown to him. If you use the approach of computer science to that, what they might do is mathematics calculating a trajectory of the ball coming toward them in order to figure out where they should place their mitt in order to catch the ball. That's not the way the brain does it. The brain does it as a trial and error process, building connections based on that trial and error. So what the large language models do is more like calculating the trajectory mathematically. That's not the way the brain does it. Okay, that's my short answer to that question.
Thank you. Great analogy. Thank you.
And we have one more question, which I think is quite related to this last one.
Okay.
So maybe you have answered part of it. It comes from Horea Haitonic. He's an R&D engineer at Synopsys Incorporated in Cluj-Napoca, Romania. I know he's not in the call because he asked me to read the question for him. So here it is. There's a recent debate related to whether LLMs understand language or if they just produce language output based on statistical algorithms without understanding what they produce. So what we have just been discussing. What does RNT have to say about this? And more generally, how can we test within the RNT framework this assumption that LLMs are or not, they are not a reflection of how language really works in humans?
Yes, interesting question. Well, I already have answered a large part of this. On this debate, I would, as you can see from what I've said, I would come down definitely on the side that LLMs do not understand language. Computers, no matter how good their software, you cannot understand language the way a human being does. By virtue of the networks of a human being, for example, anything can be related to, for example, sensory inputs from other senses than the auditory, and to the whole life experience of the person, just because everything in the network is related to everything else. So true understanding, the way human beings do it, has to use all of that information. So, it is clear to me that LLMs only produce language output based on statistical algorithms without understanding what they produce. So that's what RNG has to say about that question. So the assumption that LLMs are a reflection of how language really works in humans, no, I reject that assumption. Relational network theory leads to the opposite conclusion. And that is my short answer to that question.
Yeah, so, well, taking advantage maybe of my position as a moderator and of the fact that we still have some time left, I would add to this the following. Actually, I have just assisted to a conference on this topic a few days ago, and I think Andrei Maresho is in the call. He very nicely organized that conference, and I thank him again for inviting me. And the topic was exactly this, let's say, or around this, how LLMs produce language, the same kind of questions, they understand meaning or they don't. And I remember from some of the other talks that there were some ideas. I'm trying to resume them. That would say something like that. It's true that they do statistical processing and all those mathematical representations with vectors that finally add up to have information that is more similar to another kind of information and so on. And one idea was this: what if at a certain level of abstraction, the way the statistical processing works could be actually represented as a network kind of structure? And the second thing is because you also mentioned this kind of a motor sensory grounding, that is connection to sensory input and stuff like that, that is connection to the real world. Would LLM that has also some kind of sensors would be in a better position to, I don't know, to understand language? So it's like kind of two questions on that one.
You know, the fact that you can represent various kinds of mathematical phenomena in a network does not get you very far, because there are all kinds of different networks, and the relational network is a specific kind of network, one out of many theoretical possible networks, and it's it's based on linguistic evidence, and so I would not want to base any conclusions on such evidence. I don't know if that's very clear. Probably not.
Well, things are not clear for most of us, I think, when we talk about LLMs. So yeah. Well, thanks a lot. That was our last question on the list. So we still have some time. So as you said, maybe if there are comments or questions in the audience, maybe we can still take one or two more questions.
If I could just very briefly chime in.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Paul, for a wonderful event put together, and thanks so much to Professor Lamb for edifying and illuminating answers. Just to briefly follow up on what Paul was saying about the LLM conference I was happy to host last week. I think a lot of the participants there were in full agreement with you. But the question that I think was on a lot of their minds was something of the sort. A lot of them come from pragmatics, and they're concerned with speech act theory, with whether, say, large language models like, say, sophisticated answering machines could make assertions, could ask questions, could issue requests, and so on. And clearly that doesn't speak to the depth of human language, either formally or neurologically. But it does raise the question of how formal semantics and syntax and what we take to typify human language connects with pragmatics and the social functions of language and its connections to institutions. And so it seems as though these large language models seem to simulate human language to some extent, and in others, perhaps to innovate. And so it does raise the question of precisely what the pragmatic and social and institutional bearing the language as implemented in brains, but characterized purely computationally, might have. And so I was wondering, Professor Lamb, if you'd like to speculate a bit on the semantics pragmatics interface, if you like.
I'm not so good at that. I don't have anything against pragmatics and all those other things, but I just haven't thought much about them in relation to relational network theory. But the relational, as I was saying earlier, the relational network could be applied to everything that a human being thinks about and talks about and does. And that includes social interactions and the experiences that one has had interacting with one's family members and other people, colleagues, and people you meet at work and everything. It's all captured in the network connections of the relational networks, as well as all your knowledge of stars and galaxies and whatever light and physics and everything else like that. Everybody has a relation, there was a view of all those things, but also including social relationships and emotional experiences and so on. But more specifically than that, I'm not prepared to say at this point.
But more pointedly, thanks so much for that, and I fully agree with what you're saying. But more pointedly, given this body of research about the evolutionary history of speech acts, whether vervet monkeys could assert, whether chimpanzees could issue requests, and so on. I'm wondering if you'd similarly be prone to think of the neural realization of illocutionary forces the way you would for concepts and others.
Yeah, well, I didn't quite understand. I'm sorry.
I apologize. There's a bit of background noise here. I was just wondering if, just as you've considered applying the relational network theory to concepts more broadly, say take the concept of a question or the concept of a request, and it seems as though or concepts for such illocutionary forces seem to presuppose or encode somewhat or interactive practices. And so it seems as though studies in the evolutionary history of such practices might speak to how these concepts are implemented at a neural level.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
I fully agree, and I'm fully on board with having a spectatorial stance with respect to how these developments will finally reveal anything about questions, requests, surgeon, or maybe not. So let's.
Yeah. I would say that when you get to, I've looked at language in terms of its relationship to the brain, and which means that I have neglected to look into other questions. But I find that Michael Halliday worked on a lot of these other questions in a way that is more easily relatable to such questions about language as you are raising. And his view of language is very compatible to mine, and he accepted my theories as providing the bridge between his and neurolinguistics. So, when it comes to questions like sociolinguistic questions and pragmatic questions and so on, I think we could probably get clearer answers from Halliday's kind of linguistics than from mine. And I would go along with whatever he would have to say about it. Too bad he's not around anymore to ask directly.
Thank you, and thanks, Andre, for questions. I think Eli Matos has a question because I see a raised hand. And
Yes.
maybe, yeah.
And Professor, my question is about in the Pathways book, you left the question about the representation of process and participants. You have left the question open. My question is if it is some progress in this area, some kind of new representation using the relational network modeling to the relation between processes and participants.
Sorry, I didn't understand that.
The idea of represents process and participants using the notation of RNT.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm a little bit hard of hearing, so I have trouble with that. Maybe the audio, your audio is not coming across to me very well.
Ali, maybe you can put it in the chat, and I'll try to address it.
Yes, yes.
Paul, could you help us?
Yes, so Eli is writing it in the chat, so I'll try to read it, and maybe we can get the idea. Meanwhile, maybe one more question that we can take. Okay, so Eli says, the question is about the notation, about representing the relation between process and participants. Oh, so you are representing, for example, process and participants in a relation network notation. So, so what's the question exactly?
Oh, yeah, that's a tough question, and it's
Okay, so he says that the point was left open in your pathway of the brain book. So
yeah.
if you have anything to add about that.
Yes, it is, and it's something that this is an area that I have not felt competent to write about. I think here again, I would turn to Halliday's theories. He has something to say about that, and I think I would leave it to him. Well, you know, there's a great deal of literature that he has produced and his followers. I would have nothing to add to that.
All right. Great, thank you. And as I said, maybe we can take one last question. If there...
I have a question to Professor Lam.
Yes.
¿Qué tal? It's a great pleasure to see you again, Sid. My question is about your chapter about syntax. Recent discoveries in neuroscience have confirmed your ideas in this chapter, specifically the idea of the existence of a GPS in the brain that process the sequences of discourse. And the upper level in this in syntax is lexemic nextion. Lexemic nextion. Have you considered to include larger units as nextions of syntactic groupings or constructional nodes, nextions, I am thinking about examples of Langacker like Amy says, Bob thinks, Chris knows. Sorry. This is my question. Have you considered to include larger units at the syntactic level?
Yes. Yeah, it's supposed.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't understand the details of your question, but yeah, the thing is it's supposed to be applicable to larger unit. But you know, I will say this about syntax that much of it, what seems to be so complicated about syntax is that there are different levels involved. At the sememic level, the highest, most abstract level, conceptual, you have a simple syntax. And at the lexemic level, what seems to be complexity is often really because of what's going on in the meaning. When I was a graduate student in linguistics, people taught that you shouldn't consider meaning at all. But really, you have to consider meaning in order to understand syntax at all. So at the sememic level, a simple statement has just some kind of thing doing something. So it's just two things:
Okay.
an object and a process, object or an agent and a process. The syntactic complexity usually arises because the either one or the other or both requires a lot of wording to make it clear. When a person is talking, the object is to make oneself as clear as possible and using as few words as possible. Usually, we try to be economical, whether we think about it or not. So, in a very simple case, you say, he went, and you with a single syllable for both the agent and the process. When you get syntactic complexities, like relative clauses and prepositional phrases and so on, those are at the level of the lexemic level, the level of wording, and that's a different level of syntax. And so the you don't duplicate the sememic level constructions with the lexemic level. The sememic is just you're in terms of a network, you're identifying a particular location for the person or the agent, the things involved. It's a particular location in the relational network of things, and for the process, it's a particular location in the relational network of processes. Then if the syntax to do all that becomes complicated, it's because that complication is needed to specify which thing you're actually talking about and which process you're actually talking about. And those are at the level of wordings, that is, at the lexemic level. So complexities like relative clauses are only at the lexemic level. I don't know if that makes any sense, but.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Sid, and thank you, Paul.
Good to see you.
See you.
Okay. Well, Paul, I think we. Are you there?
You're muted, Paul.
Sorry. Yeah. So I was just saying that I've seen your raised hand, Adolfo. So I guess you want to add something. So let's hear you, and then we can go ahead and wrap it up. Yeah, please.
Yeah, thank you. So very selfishly, perhaps, this is not a question. I just wanted to take the opportunity because it has been so long since we've last spoken, Sid, to tell you how instrumental you've been in my career. There was a major transition that I did from thinking that I would become a linguist to then becoming someone who works in depth in the neurobiology of language. It was your work and your thinking that propelled that change. There was nothing else. It was reading your book, is reading your work, and learning that there were other ways of thinking about language that were not the traditional ones that I had been sort of exposed to. And that gave me encouragement. And then meeting you and being so kindly welcome and find such openness and encouragement and support from you, that meant a lot. And so this is my very long way of saying, more briefly perhaps, thank you.
Well, thank you. It was a pleasure being with you. It's too bad you were not able to spend more time with me at Rice University several years ago, and you know, too bad we didn't have more time together in Argentina. But anyway, I'm glad I helped your thinking process.
You spent a lot of time in my mind and in my thinking, so definitely, Sid. Again, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
So if I might add, thank you, Adolfo, for expressing what several people in this call, I think about Sid's work and about himself. So yes, a big thank you for all of us, Professor Lamb, for your work and for being an inspiration for all of us who are struggling to understand language in the end.
Yeah.
And thanks again for being part of our 1-year celebration. I think it was the perfect way of celebrating this Celine anniversary. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you. I'm glad I was able to help.
Yeah, and thank you everybody for participating. As you know, I will send brief minutes after the meeting. I'll send a link where you can see the recording and more news about future events coming soon. So again, a big thank you to Professor Lamb and to all of you, and I wish you all a great day, night, whatever time of the day is where you are.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Paul.
Okay, thank you all.
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye, Paul. Thank you very much for putting all this together.
Yeah, thank you. I hope
It was
you had a
good
good
seeing.
time too.
I saw people that I haven't seen for years.
I'm glad, yeah. I'm pretty sure they were glad to see you and hear you as well.
Yeah. Okay, good.
All right, well then take care. Every now and then
Okay.
I'll bother you with some message on your email, maybe.
Okay, good. Yeah.
Yeah.
I look forward
Say
to hearing.
hello. Thank you. Say hello to Susan and take care.
Okay. Bye.
Great. Bye-bye.
Bye.